Hello, everybody. Welcome to yet another Midwestern Marx broadcast. We got three of the OG Midwestern Marxists here today. Special treat for everybody. So we're going to get into a lot of interesting topics. We'll talk about the America First rally or failed rally that happened this weekend. We'll also be discussing some of the recent goings on with NATO and Ukraine and a couple of other things that I am completely forgetting right now. But we'll get right into it after the international.
All right, welcome back, everyone. This is our casual Monday stream. Hopefully, something we keep going. No suits for today. How's everybody doing?
Good. I'm feeling great without any sleeves today. I think we should do this every day.
I wear sleeves even on casual days because I have embarrassing tattoos I got when I was like 18, 19. So.
A lot of Barbie stuff on his arms. I've seen it.
Right. Yeah.
Today we're going to be talking about a whole bunch of good stuff, some of which was mentioned by Eddie, others which were forgotten. Yeah. But we had a little bit over a week ago the St. Petersburg conference, economic conference, and we're going to be talking a little bit about that, what that represents in terms of this nodal point that we're in history, this point where the old world is dying and a new one is actively being born, contrary Gramsci's quote. We're going to watch a video from this conference, the section on the philosophy of multipolarity, a little 5-minute clip from Sheng Wei, professor at Fudan University, I believe. Great Chinese scholar, someone very high-ranking in the CPC. We're going to get his ideas. We're going to discuss a little bit concerning what Marxism can offer this new multipolar world. Is it multipolarity or Marxism in terms of ideology? We think not. We think Marxism is a way of thinking that can be quite beneficial in periods of transition, such as the one that we're in. And we'll also discuss a series of other things, the hypocrisy of the U.S. state, the lifting of the ban on selling weapons to Azov, how they've legitimized it, and a whole host of other things. But I think we could probably get started with the thing that has been raging in the internet, which is the America First little event that was done recently. Eddie, you want to start us off with a discussion on that?
I'd be happy to. And by the way, let me know what you think of the new studio with the brick background and the light up sign. I'm pretty excited about this, so I hope people like it. But yeah, I have a lot to say about it. I mean, for one, it is good that the event failed, right? It's good that it sort of blew up in their faces, but we also need to understand and be realistic about the fact that it wasn't necessarily a failure. They did have 2,000 people at this event who are supporting this fascistic, white nationalist sort of race essentialist ideology, right? So there were 2,000 people who were willing to show up for that, including some prominent people like Sneeko, or the one that really bugs me is Jake Shields, because he's a former MMA fighter who I used to like a lot. So as capitalism and liberalism decay, and as the liberal ideology becomes more and more of a joke, as people see through it even more, and with the combined effect of our economic conditions continuing to deteriorate under neoliberalism, people can go really one of two ways. They can go towards fascism or communism. This is why I tweeted, like, communists are the heroes of history and fascists are like the arch villains. The conservatives and liberals are important side characters, but in moments of crisis and the climax of the story, a lot of times it comes, or most of the time, under a capitalist mode of production, it comes down to a battle between the fascists and the communists. So we need to be very wary of what they're doing. We need to be able to combat their arguments and understand how to deconstruct their arguments and show people how stupid they are and how they're based on literally nothing, just pure idealism and abstracting people's races and using that, you know, as a way to divide society rather than looking at class divisions. But it also pisses me off, and I know Fuentes has been at this for a long time, right? He's been doing it for like 10 plus years, a lot longer than us. But I feel like someone like Jake Shields, if we were more organized and if communists were more serious, and if people in America actually thought of communists, and this is changing, but if they actually thought of communists as upstanding people in their community, as leaders, as people who you can get behind, and people who really want to move the country forward and progress the country and make the country better and lift working people up. If people actually understood that that's what communism was, because we had a real organized, strong communist movement in this country, people like Jake Shields would be communists. They wouldn't be America firsters. They wouldn't be drifting towards white nationalism, because we'd be able to destroy those arguments. But instead we have a bunch of wreckers on the left who are making the left unpalatable to a lot of people. And we have this nascent, this emergent communist movement that is growing and isn't as big as the America First movement because it hasn't been at it as long yet. It's been at it for only a fraction of the time. But it's time to step up. It's time to ask yourself, what can you do to make sure that your kids aren't inheriting a world, you know, run by Nazis? That you're not going to allow capitalism to decay in this country to just devolve into barbarism. All right, it's time to step the fuck up, get active in your community, get organized, organize your workplace, organize your community, and act as an upstanding person in your community yourself. Understand that as a communist, you represent something bigger than yourself, and make communism a serious movement in this country, because it's our only option. It's our only way forward out of capitalism. We can't let things devolve into barbarism or let, you know, white nationalist ideologies take root. So
yeah, I think you make some really good points, Eddie. At times like this, when society is moving into crises, acute crises that there's no way out of, people naturally begin gravitating towards those who seem to have an answer, right? Some kind of solution, some kind of new thing that will pull us out of the crisis. And so that's why it comes down to people being misled by white nationalists like Fuentes, or coming to communism. And when communists don't do their job properly, when they alienate the working class, of course they go to people that give them easy solutions, and they don't think about the fact that the ideological framework used by these America First people is literally belief in magic. At the end of the day, it is telling you that the content of your blood somehow controls how you act within society, gives you this power or that power, whatever it is. On the topic of Jake Shields, though, this is something that it's wild to me. This guy has agreed to have a conversation with not just with me, first of all, personally, with Haas and with John already, and has ghosted all three of us, right? And when I was speaking to him, setting up our conversation originally, he sounded open. He was like, look, you don't seem like a lot of these leftists. You seem to genuinely want to help this country. And so I want to have this conversation. I'm skeptical about communism from all what I've heard, but I want to have it. And then, you know, all of this stuff happens. The Fuentes, oh, my cat's in here saying hello, happens. And suddenly he ghosts me and stops replying to the messages. So that seems a little suspicious to me. But I think you're right, Eddie. If we had a solid organizational foundation already, people wouldn't even go to these sort of white nationalists at all. I mean, the amount of denial of reality that and misinformation you have to embrace in order to like actually think Jewish people secretly run everything, despite the main ruling class names in this country being Rockefeller, being Carnegie, being Morgan, being Ford, being DuPont, being Vanderbilt, etc., is just a phenomenal amount. But if we were there with the facts instead, rather than what the left presents to people, people would automatically just come with us. It's not a difficult decision when you're given two options.
And I think that one of the things that also has to be mentioned is this paradox, like their whole movement. It's called America First. They want to present themselves in a very Americanist veneer, but they're perhaps the most anti-American force out there in the current political spectrum. And it's very simple why. We have a very rich tradition of fighting against segregation. We had a tremendous second revolution to overthrow the very anti-American institution of chattel slavery within the context of capitalism. Within our first ever draft of the Declaration of Independence, one of the things that was lambasted by Jefferson was slavery, the slave trade that was imposed on us by Britain. It was, of course, removed by some of the more reactionary conservative factions of the founding fathers. Some of the main figures that we have in our history, known all around the world, admired all around the world, inspiring figures like MLK. They represent the part of America that has fought against segregation, that has fought to realize what America actually is, which is this unique civilization in a process of formation. And what makes it unique is the fact that the civilizational bonds that it's creating is composed of a plurality of people from all over the world. Reagan isn't someone we look back to ideologically, but he did have one quote where he was right. Like, there is something unique about America that, you can go to Ireland as a foreigner and spend many decades and not be Irish. You can go to any other country in the world and spend decades there and not be from that country. You'll still be seen as a foreigner. America is kind of the only country that, because of the hodgepodge that it is, you can come from anywhere and become American. It's a real unity of many, e pluribus unum, one that contains the many within it. And when you are promoting the tribalist, racist, essentialist views that these America First people promote, you're literally anti-American. So I think in periods of crisis, as Eddie mentioned, both of these forces present themselves as contending alternatives to the mass of people, either communism or fascism. And I think it's clear, for me at least, that communism is what, in the American context, builds on the best parts of our legacy. It builds on the American trajectory. It builds on the most progressive thinkers in the history of America, and it takes that to its logical and practical conclusion. It's the only form of life that can actually realize the ideas of a government of, by, and for the people, and the more laudable universalist ideals of the progressive bourgeoisie at the time. Fascism, on the contrary, wants to take us backwards. It wants to undo that which makes America America. And as dialectical materialists, we see things in their movement. We don't separate them from the processes and movements that they're a part of to define them in some abstract realm. So America can only be defined in this movement, and the American trajectory points towards communism. Fascism is fundamentally anti-American because it's trying to move us away from that trajectory.
I just want to say real quick, you cannot be pro-America if you are anti-millions of Americans. Sorry, Eddie, go ahead.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, that needed to be said. You can't, like, America is a diverse country, so you can't be, pro-American if you're against diversity. Like, what's this about? We're America first, but we're white nationalists. Well, that's not all of America. What the hell are you talking about? Right? Not all of America is white. So these people are in favor of race war. They're in favor, and they build their audiences by criticizing Zionism, but they're just wannabe Netanyahus, right? They're not saying Zionism is bad. They're saying Zionism is Jewish supremacy, and we should do the same thing. We should do white supremacy to protect ourselves. We should, become the most powerful race. And it's an ideology that leads towards nothing except violence, death, ethnic cleansing, genocide, all of these things that would tear America apart. And I think this could also lead into the controversy that surrounded my speech at the Chicago Workers Conference this weekend. I didn't know it was going to be a controversial speech, but it ended up being. There was someone who showed up and asked, a sort of trick question or tough question or trap question, I guess would be the word. It's sort of a trap question about Landback, and then started tweeting about Landback rather than engaging with me in a conversation. And then Seabass, one of our ops, one of the guys who doxed me in the past by leaking my public phone number, used that speech to claim that I was denying the genocide of indigenous Native Americans. Right, but if you watch the full speech, both these guys are shaking their head because they know how ridiculous that is. But if you watch my speech, the point that I was making was that settler colonialism no longer describes our economic system today, because the process of settler colonialism, which did happen and which was horrible and which was a genocide and which should be prevented from happening in the future, but realistically, it already happened, right? The genocide was already carried out, and indigenous people of today aren't dealing with people coming from Europe and murdering them and breaking up their communities and stealing their land. They're working class people just like anyone else, or they're living under capitalism just like anyone else. And they're put on these reservations or given these reservations, which are some of the most economically destitute places in the country. So what I advocate for is political sovereignty, political autonomy, and economic development for the Native people. And I think that we can only understand their position in the current society if we understand that that is a capitalist society, a neoliberal society. It's no longer a settler colonial society. And you can see this by the contrast between the plight of modern indigenous Americans and the plight of Palestinians, right? And this isn't to discount or downplay the specific struggles that indigenous Americans face and working class indigenous people in America face, but their plight is different than the Palestinians. The Palestinians are being massacred by the dozen every single day. They're trapped in a concentration camp. They have no water, they have no food, and they're having bombs dropped on their heads every day. And the purpose of that is to steal their land. And in the West Bank and in Gaza, people are having their homes demolished, or more so in the West Bank, they're being kicked out of their homes, and their homes are being stolen by settlers, right? That is settler colonialism. Unfortunately, that already happened in America, right? And what these people do when they act like we're still living 250 years ago and deny any analysis of how conditions have changed is they're rejecting the positive role that people like MLK played. They're rejecting the progressive role that the civil rights movement played in ending apartheid in this country. So that's why it's so important to recapture what we call the American trajectory. And that's what my speech focused on a lot. And I didn't expect it to cause controversy, but it did. By the way, shout out to VLX for the 10 gifted subs. That is huge. Really appreciate that. We're a People's Funded Institute. Really cool that 10 people are going to get memberships randomly now. So appreciate that a bunch.
And shout out to Justin Watson. That's a great answer. Ultras have lost their mind. Absolutely. That's a real horseshoe theory. The ultra leftists and the actual rightists and, and all of these America First people, they're both tribalists. They both, at their core, their worldview is one that separates the people and feeds into the ruling class. And that's the paradox of these people calling themselves dissenters, right? They're fully compatible with the established order, and specifically the ruling hegemonic institutions, which need division. That's part of why wokeism has been fundamental. They need division. And now they're trying to hawk back and develop one of the forms that division primarily took throughout American history, which is racism. They're literally as rooted in the establishment, the most reactionary, the negative pole of the American trajectory, the pole that has been struggling to be overcome throughout hundreds of years. That's what they're rooted in. Their fundamental ideology is divide et impera. That's at the core of it. That's how they serve the elite, because they want to divide the people on this mythical idea of race and white purity and all these different things. It's a form of the purity fetish. We want pure white people in our movement. The paradox is that it's being led by a gay Mexican, which is ironic. But they serve the ruling elite. They served them in the function that has been necessary, not just for the capitalist elite, but for elites all throughout class society, which is dividing the people. That's what they're fundamentally doing. They're dividing the people at a time when the American people are more than ever a people, more than ever working within a soil that allows them to come together and fight a united, multiracial, multi-religious, multi-ethnic, etc. class struggle. And they're serving as one of the primary forces of reaction, and therefore aiding the established. You can't be a dissenter. You can't be, anti-establishment, anti-status quo, anti-deep state if your ideology is premised on helping the order that you're claiming to be against. And that's where they meet and unite hand in hand with some of the ultra left and the positions that the ultra left takes. And you know what's interesting? There's a generation in this country that's called the greatest generation. Who did that generation fight against? And this is again to emphasize the anti-American character of these people. Who did the greatest American generation fight against? They fought against the Nazis. That was a generation that stood shoulder to shoulder with the Soviet people, almost 30 million of them massacred by the Nazis. That greatest generation fought against the Nazis. How are you, Mr. Fuentes, and everyone else, Lucas Gage, all of these Nazis, how are you going to tell me that you want an America First movement, but you're literally upholding the ideologies and figures of the people that the greatest generation fought and lost their lives to smash, to prevent that cancer of Nazism and fascism from spreading around the world? One of the most glorious battles that our people have waged, right next to the struggle against slavery. And you're going to adopt the ideology of the cancerous Nazis or the same ideology of the racist planter class. So it's fundamentally anti-American, and that's an angle that the left will never bring up because they fundamentally are national nihilists. They reject the history of America. They reject the history of America and America as a whole because they can't see that it's the progressive part that's taking us forward, the part that leads us towards socialism, having certain American characteristics. So they can't combat this in a way that can actually defeat it, because that's the best angle to take with the American people. These people are anti-Americans. They're anti-American. They're literally upholding the ideology that the greatest generation of Americans fought against, that your grandparents and great-grandparents fought against. And they want to sit here and have the audacity to call themselves the America First movement? No.
They're precise, so well said, brother. They are specifically anti-American and specifically for trying to divide the American people up along the lines that the ruling class considers convenient. This, they share a philosophical worldview level foundation with the wokes, right? They are just as woke as the people they claim to hate. And the wokes are just as reactionary as these white supremacists, because what they're doing is denying the historical foundation of everything. What does Marxism even study? It studies development, right? I tell this to my students in my basics of Marxism class. When you hear dialectical logic, think developmental logic. We are trying to figure how material things actually develop in the real world. And in 2024, an American people have developed. Our entire history, the foundation of what Marxism gives us, this actual materialist view of everything in the world, is a history of people from all over coming together, all these different peoples, right, that begin as separate entities, but like our greatest revolutionary says, end up in the same boat now, right? We end up e pluribus unum. We end up out of many, one. And that doesn't sort of turn us into this amalgamation smush, right? Where everybody becomes the same thing. The whole of what makes Americans Americans is this diversity. And so the America First slogan is a ridiculous slogan for people who want to balkanize our country. Communism, on the other hand, is a ridiculous slogan for people who want to balkanize our country. This material history has happened. You're not going to undo it. Whether you think it's good or bad doesn't matter. Whether you want to be, a pure one thing or a pure other thing doesn't matter. It's here. This is reality as it exists, and you're going to have to deal with it as it exists. This has nothing to do with certain bigoted attitudes you may think people have or not. The point is that the American people are inherently American. Martin Luther King wasn't Russian, right? He wasn't Argentine. He wasn't Egyptian. He was American. And his movement is a nodal point, a revolutionary moment in the history of the creation of the American people. Without that movement, we aren't what we are today. But that movement happened. It's concrete. It's real. And trying to deny it, the America First people, with their like purity fetish, really act as they say, you know, this was founded as a white Christian nation. No, it wasn't. First of all, whatever happened to keep ancient lands your storied pop, right? Give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. That is the foundation of this country. And that is precisely what happened, right? Undoing that is impossible, which brings me to another point. We were talking about Jake Shields a while ago. He had an interesting post on X today where he was just confused that there were racists attacking him for being only 90% white. Well, that's what happens when you're allying yourself to white nationalists who genuinely want to separate people along racial lines, right? I don't think we should be surprised that they're going to continue attacking you on that basis. And as you get attacked, Jake, remember how silly that is. And remember that communists are the ones with the real solution and the real view of American history.
So Jake too is from a similar world as me, the grappling world, and the sport he competes in is literally called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? It's a sport with, at least where it's practiced in America, with a very diverse group, you know, a diverse group of people who usually all consider themselves Americans. I mean, you'll have some Brazilians and other people mixing it up, right? But I know the gym that Jake trained at had people of all different backgrounds, right? Is he going to say those people aren't Americans, or that those people's interests aren't the same interests as his because he's white? Like, it's such an antisocial ideology, which is why a lot of these groypers are the most incel, antisocial looking people you could imagine, which is why it sucks so bad to see someone like Jake joining up with them too. But it's such an antisocial ideology, because how do you live life? How do you compete in grappling, you know, thinking that certain people are inferior, or that your, you know, racial group is superior, or that you can't unite with other people or do stuff with other people, or you know, you can't be an American the same way that a black person can be an American, right? How are you supposed to have relationships with people who have differences than you, or especially superficial differences like that, if you're running around with white nationalists and buying into this white nationalist ideology? It's an inherently antisocial ideology. And we're talking a lot about how the underpinnings of both the woke left, quote unquote woke left, and the reactionary America First fascistic right are similar. They're race essentialist philosophical underpinnings. And someone suggested that we watch this video, when wokes and racists actually agree on everything. I kind of want to watch this. I've never seen it, but we can react.
It's hilarious.
Let's watch it.
Before we do, I just want to say something real quick, Eddie. Denying the black section, especially of America, saying they're not real Americans, whether you do it from the right or the left, is just absurd. There's no America without the black freedom struggle that creates who we are at two revolutionary moments in our history, and that gives us the best parts of our culture. I mean, without the enslaved black proletariat, you don't have modern music, really. You don't get rock and roll. You don't get hip hop. You don't get some of the best forms of American comedy. It's absolutely absurd, but I apologize. Go ahead.
Just to hound on that, this person, Mousy, says the history of this country is a history of slavery. That's not only wrong, like from the sense that it's extremely one-sided. It doesn't look at the history of struggle against that. But in not looking at that, it turns into its opposite. I'm sure this person, Mousy, thinks that they're saying this from a very anti-racist, woke perspective. You know, this country's all bad. It's just racism. It's just slavery. It's just genocide. It turns into its opposite. And it's actually, you know, there's a lot of racism implicit in it. And I'll tell you why. Because it's unable to recognize, right, the struggle of the Black freedom movement. It's unable to recognize the struggle of Black people, of working people, of oppressed peoples for recognition, for equality under bourgeois law. And its inability to recognize that, it ends up functioning with what some scholars have called a white blind spot. The only time they see struggle, it's when it's white people. They're unable to see ontologically Black people as people that are capable of struggling and whose struggles also mark history. And so it's actually a form of racism. Because what did King teach us about racism? Racism is thinking that someone, a group of people, not because of environment or culture, they're very ontological being, who they are as a people, which is itself something that could be questioned, but who they are as a people is inferior. And a sign of treating someone as inferior is not being able to recognize their struggle. When Marx gets asked in a questionnaire by his daughter, what's the quality you respect the most in humanity? He says struggle. There's nothing more human than struggle. And when you sit there and say America its history is just slavery, you're unable to recognize that most human dimension of humanity itself, which is struggle, and which in our country has been led by the Black freedom movement. So that, my friend Mousy, is a racist sentiment. It's a racist sentiment because you're unable to see the legacy of struggle that is central. It's at the heart of what makes America, America.
The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. And this is the primary form it's taken in this country.
When me and Brad first met, I didn't think we'd get along, but turns out we kind of agree on everything. Your racial identity is the most important thing. Everything should be looked at through the lens of race.
Jinx, you owe me a Coke. We both have a lot of opinions about people of color, even though we barely know any.
I say colored people, but as long as we're classifying them, we both think minorities are a united group who think the same and act the same.
And vote the same. You don't want to lose your black card. Sorry, I don't know. I just think we should
roll back discrimination laws so we can hire based on race again. Jinx, now you owe me a Coke. Hey, tell them what you told me yesterday.
White actors should only do voices for white cartoon characters.
I've been saying that for years. Stick to your own.
Us white people, we have so much privilege.
I agree. It is a privilege to be white. Ask him about interracial dating.
All I said is that black men who date white women have internalized racism, and white men that date ethnic women are fetishizing them.
Guys against interracial dating now. Like, am I being pranked? Did Boomer put you up to this?
Ugh, you know that taco place is white owned?
White people should be making white foods like Kraft macaroni and cheese, no seasoning, not even salt. It's like he's a mind reader. I mean, I've been pushing for segregation forever, and my man does what?
I created an improv comedy show exclusively for ethnic people.
Guy segregates comedy on my birthday.
White people need to stop wearing dreadlocks, and they need to stop appropriating black people's music.
Shaved heads and country music, the way God intended.
You know all white people are racist.
I'm listening.
Even if you have a black wife or a black friend group, you're still really racist.
You know, he just kicked a guy out of the organization for having a black girlfriend, but if you can promise me he's still really racist, we'll consider letting him back in.
Black people should only shop at black businesses. I guess the only thing we really disagree about is I think white people are the root of all evil.
But what did I tell you, though? If we can narrow that down to a certain group of tiny-hatted white people, I think we can come to an understanding.
Technically, I don't consider Jewish people white.
Neither do I.
That's pretty good. It's the problem is viewing everything through the lens of race instead of viewing it through the lens of class, and viewing, you know, struggles for black liberation or indigenous liberation as class struggles in themselves. Because who is it that the indigenous communities want political sovereignty and political autonomy from? The capitalist class. Who's preventing them from having real economic development in their communities? It's the capitalist class, right? Instead, they're stuck with the stupid casino economy, which leaves them leaves regular working class indigenous people in terrible situations. So when you do view things through the lens of race rather than through the lens of class, it leads to all of these misinterpretations and these silly ways of proceeding. Like I pointed out many times, a lot of the ultra leftists are literally calling for race war instead of class war, and that's just not only is that not what Marxism's about, but that's not the proper way to advance society and to uplift people of every different cultural, religious, ethnic, racial background.
Can I just say real quick, that's what drives me the craziest about it. I wouldn't care if that's their lens and they just say, hey, these are my views. But when they tell people they're communists and Marxists, that's what bothers me, because they're not. They're just not. They don't. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Carlos.
No, I couldn't agree more. By the way, thank you so much to Kong
Konyitai? I don't.
Konyitai for becoming a YouTube member. Thank you so much, comrade. Thank you, Sam, for the $10 super chat. It seems there's so-called political dissidents in the U.S. who consider capitalism and communism equally bad and authoritarian. Isn't this just childish anarchism, just aimless rebellion? Well, it's intentional. Remember that what these people call communism, I mean, they have a vague idea of communist states, but what they call communism at home is just the so-called left wing. There's nothing left about it, but the so-called left wing of the elites. They just call the Democrats communism. So if they hate communism and they think communism is the elite of the U.S., then they're kind of hating the right people. They're just calling them the wrong name. And it's up to us to delineate what actual communists are about, and to show them who it is, those people they already hate, that made them hate from the moment they were born in this country or came to it, the communists. Because it's only the communists who are an actual threat to these people's hegemony, to their order, and that's why they make you hate it to the point where you think that they are communists, which is extremely absurd, but it's a very easy fix. It's a very easy fix. If anyone's talked to one of these folks, it's quite easy to say, look, I'm a communist. I have nothing to do with these people. I hate them as much as you. And if you really hate them, why would you accept what they say about communists? It's not that hard.
I do it all day.
Yep. By the way, thanks again to the comrade via Alex for the $5 super chat. Even if we were to concede that historically the USA is primarily Christian, they in no way uphold the teachings of Christ, vulgar Darwinism. Yeah, that's absolutely true. There's so many components of Christianity that are just spat on by these.
Can we talk about that for 1 minute, though?
Yeah.
I saw this Jesus Motorcycle, who's a fantastic artist, by the way. You guys should all follow him on Twitter. He posted a video recently of Nick Fuentes saying, that because someone was not Christian, that was the problem, right? And still has the goal to call himself an American, right? And say he wants to put America first. This country is founded upon freedom of religion, right? Escape from religious persecution is one of the big things that brought the first wave of mass immigration here, which built this country, right? So if you're trying to say that this is a Christian nation, I would suggest you read Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine, who are the major theorists of the 1776 revolution. And you will find that it in no way it was ever even meant to be a Christian nation, but a nation where everyone could worship as they see fit, and the state would not give you preference.
It would be anti-Christian to make it a Christian nation.
Precisely. I mean, that's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, AD.
Oh, if you have something else to say, say it. I was just going to say, should we move on to our next topic?
Yeah, I was just saying that it's strange how many of these supposed Christians act in the least Christian manner possible, judging everyone based on the surface appearance rather than the content of their character. To be racist is to be anti-Christian. It just is. If everyone is equal under God, then you can't be racist. Sorry.
Yeah, we got to talking about this a little bit in my Marxist philosophy seminar. Part of the reason why Hegel accepts a form
Well,
of
Carlos,
Christian.
before you go on the Hegel rant, one of you has your Discord or your Skype pinging in the background.
I think it's you,
shut
Carlos.
that off.
I don't know how to shut that off.
You don't know?
It should be in your tray. Just right click it and you'll see a closed window.
Go to the bottom right, see the little up arrow, hit that. And then where you see the Discord notification, right click on it and hit quit Discord. Or exit.
I wasn't on it.
This
Right,
is our
but
familiarity
It's
with
open in the background, it still pings. And it was
Yeah.
like someone's getting a lot of pings right now. Continue Hegel rant. Unless you still haven't figured it out.
I haven't
it's
figured
still
it out.
playing.
You don't.
The up arrow at the bottom right part of your screen.
How about we mute Carlos until he figures it out, and I'll go on a Hegel rant.
There you go.
Hegel, the very first lesson that Hegel teaches us is that pure being is nothing. It's empty. It's bullshit.
That's not where I was
Being
going,
is
though.
only
It was
becoming.
Christianity. It was the Christian point.
I missed what you said. Go ahead.
The point is that the reason why Hegel ends up at this, like, his philosophy of religion is basically Christian atheism. And he considers that because it's Christianity, the first place in world history that comes to posit the conception that all are free. It's the universalism in Christianity that is extremely progressive. So whenever these people get Christianity and distort it into something exclusive to Christianity itself, it is working against the universalist logic that is present in Christianity, and that the best thinkers of the West and other traditions have been able to recognize a lot of value in. Sorry.
No, it's good. I like that. I'm referring, Sam, thank you for the $5 super chat. Appreciate that. I'm referring to certain anti-authoritarian YouTubers who say the media / government / deep state lies, but agree with all the CIA narratives on the DPRK or whatever. It's frustrating. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of, and this is kind of my concept of hindsight anti-imperialists. These people who know that the Iraq War was BS and know that the media and State Department lied us into the Iraq War, but then they're, expecting us, but then they believe the ruling class is telling them the truth about Ukraine or telling them the truth about Palestine or whatever. It's like, no, they systematically lie about everything. The media's job isn't to be there to inform you. It is to actively misinform you. And it's not, as Michael Parenti explained in Inventing Reality, which is on my bookcase up there, top shelf, because it's such a great book. The media isn't just accidentally making mistakes, right? They didn't accidentally get it wrong with Iraq. They lied us into Iraq at the behest of large oil companies, at the behest of finance capital, and at the behest of the Bush administration and the CIA and the so-called deep state. So there's people who say that they understand this and they call themselves Marxists, but they actually don't understand it, and they don't know how to apply a critical lens to the mainstream media.
Yeah, it becomes a question of belief or skepticism, and then application of that skepticism rather than letting it remain abstract. We can all say, I don't trust the media, right? And this is actually how I get my coworkers on board for communism. We can say that, but if we don't actually apply it when viewing the media, it doesn't mean anything. Or we apply it haphazardly and don't apply it in one circumstance and do apply it in another.
Absolutely. So let's switch to our next discussion point. A little bit over a week ago in St. Petersburg, there was the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, where 21,000 people showed up from 139 nations. So just from the show up, you can kind of see that the West's attempt to isolate Russia is not very effective. People like Pepe Escobar have described it an essential event to see how we're breaking into a new multipolar multinodal, which is a very interesting concept, right? Nodal points are those points where quantity turns into quality and there's leaps. If it's multinodal, that means we're seeing various points where the shift into a new world order is evident in polycentric world. It's very interesting because there was a great speech that was given by Putin. It was about an hour long. One of the main themes about it is that regardless of all of the sanctions and everything the US and NATO has done to Russia ever since the beginning of the special military operation, which we've covered extensively on this channel, so we're not going to delve too much on. Ever since that started, instead of weakening Russia, as all of the bourgeois press says, it was able to accomplish, it's been the complete opposite. Russia, with its resources, with its resourcefulness, with its people, with its connection, with the fact that, the attacks on Russia sent a signal out to the whole world about what could happen to them if they don't toe the line of the US and NATO. It created the perfect storm. And what we have found is the opposite of what the West wanted. The West wanted a weakened Russia. And what has happened is that in the time, Russia has been able to raise itself to the fourth largest economy in the world by purchasing power parity, so PPP. It's been able to expand its trade and labor markets and digitize platforms, technologies, everything with the whole Eurasian region, with Africa, with Latin America. It's completely been integrated into this development of BRICS, which it goes hand in hand with the development of Russia, in integrating the global majority into the formation of this new world order. The developments that we've seen from BRICS ever since the beginning of the special military operation have been insane. And some of these hint to being just the beginning. Putin stated that BRICS is working on their own payment infrastructure, independent from pressures and sanctions by the collective West. So that would be just another example of the death knell of American imperialism, because it'll obviously hit dollar hegemony, a dollar hegemony that is crumbling, that is one of the most important tools in the imperialist toolbox to sanction, the half of humanity that we're sanctioning. Putin was able to have a meeting with Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil, that got ousted through lawfare. Now she heads the new development bank of the BRICS, and they were talking about something called the unit, which is a transactional, apolitical form of cross-border payment, anchored 40% in gold and 60% in other BRIC currency. So the financial institutions and mediums for this new world order are coming into being quite specifically. There was also just so many different panels that were extremely enlightening. There was 59 countries that simultaneously applied to join not only BRICS, but the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union. So 3 of the central institutions that are at the foundation of the development of the multipolar world. And when you see this, the only conclusion that you can really come to, and it's one that's hinted at in the hysteria that we see coming from the Western media and Western journals, is that we're coming to see the end of, centuries-long dominance by the West. And it's very beautiful. We've thought about it through different ways. We've talked a little bit about different ways of seeing it. I've referred to it as the entrance into a post-Columbian period, post-1492. We've talked about the communitarian mode of production and the free association of producers, which is a framework that a good comrade of mine, Mexican economist Oscar Rojas, has put forth. There's many frameworks thinking about this because it's still very embryonic, very undeveloped. It's not yet a concrete totality. So the knowledge that we have of it is impossible for it to be concrete yet. But a new world is being born. And I think that, events such as the St. Petersburg conference was able to hint something. It was able to embody, this new world that's being born.
Yeah. Here's the thing. The entire imperialist system of our ruling class is backed only by the dollar. as deindustrialization has sort of spread, right, because it's cheaper for them to send production elsewhere and then back here for the markets, it's expanded debt. And how it generally works, because our country is actually a debtor imperialist, it's the more powerful country as a debtor. So what it does is force other countries to use the dollar, to trade in the dollar. It gets them involved in treasury bond scams through the IMF and World Bank. It's a whole blah, blah, blah. I write about it in my book on reproletarianization. But as that zone shrinks, this system, the Bretton Woods system, always had something of a sell-by date, right? As it shrinks, because other countries are not going to be dependent upon the rules of, the international ruling class, our ruling class, whatever you want to call it, and need self-sufficiency, especially in things like food and energy. As they sort of build themselves up, as represented in BRICS, in China and Russia specifically, no wonder our ruling class targets them, right? This causes the dollar zone to shrink because there is a more attractive alternative all over the world, other nations that won't be so extractive. This causes reproletarianization here. The shocks aren't going to be felt by the ruling class. They're going to pass it on to us. This gets us all into debt. This creates the skyrocketing productive capacity and dwindling wage rate. This causes the inflations. This is the center of everything right now. And so anytime you hear somebody say, we were talking about the America first, right? In order to actually benefit the American people, we need to align our material interests. And the people of the USA, the working class people, our interests already align with those in China, in Russia, in the BRICS nations. What's good for them becomes good for us because it's harming our ruling class.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that a lot of the ultra elements, like what we would call like Maoist third worldists, don't tend to understand, is that all of these shocks that are going to happen from the collapse of the empire are going to reverberate and have effects here at home, right? So if we don't have a movement for American communism, for bringing communism here at home, it's going to have disastrous effects on the people of the country, and things are going to devolve into barbarism. And like we were talking about at the beginning of the show, more people are going to go towards, fascist, violent, racist ideologies as they look for solutions to their deteriorating material conditions. And a lot of the capitalists who dominate our society today are interest-dealing capitalists. They're not industrial capitalists for the most part. There's not a whole lot of production that's actually going on in the United States. And a lot of these capitalists make money by trapping all of us in debt. And then, we make payments back to them with interest. And as Noah explained, by trapping entire countries in debt. Right. And now we're seeing like 5 coups across Africa where governments are being overthrown and Western nations are being kicked out. Right. And these countries are saying we need to either restructure our debt with the IMF or we're going to stop paying it. Right. Or they're moving towards BRICS. And as someone pointed out earlier, the dollar system is deeply embedded. The U.S. dominance of the global financial system through institutions like the IMF and World Bank is deeply embedded. So it's not going to be an overnight switch that BRICS just comes in and, kicks out the U.S. global financial system. It's going to happen gradually and in spurts. But as this happens, like Noah said, these interest-bearing capitalists or these interest-dealing capitalists, as they're kicked out of these other countries, they're going to try and make their profit somewhere. And they're going to trap us in even more debt here at home and try and extract every last penny that they can out of us. And things are only going to get worse for the American populace in terms of economic conditions. So if we don't have a real movement to actually rebuild this country and actually move towards a different economic system that isn't based off finance capital and this predatory, form of debt trapping and charging people interest, it's going to be a freaking disaster. And all these, ultra third worldist Maoists aren't going to like it because they've been used to living in, comfortable, industrial, relatively peaceful society. And it's not going to look that way in another few decades.
And historically, and this is something that Michael Hudson's work outlines very well, and other researchers as well. When debt is of the character that we've seen, where it gets to the point where people just can't pay it back, what ends up happening? They just don't. And I think naturally the tendency is towards that. And the thing is that in order to do that, you can't do it within the confines of the current global system. You need the birthing of a new world in order to actually do that. I also wanted to emphasize that from the Marxist standpoint, these aren't just like abstract struggles of blocks. You know, there is a class struggle present in the struggle for multipolarity, and it's not just the one that's occurring within various nations, some of which are politically and ideologically diverse, some of which are explicit dictatorships of the proletariat, like in China, and others which are not necessarily that, like in Iran or India or Russia, but who are also part of this general phenomenon of a multipolar world where countries are engaging on the basis of win-win relations. And if you take the nation as an entity, it really is, as you know, as Oscar Rojas mentions this, it's you know, the free association of producers, which is, if we remember, one of the ways Marx describes communism, specifically in the third volume of Capital. And when you look at the logic that is animating all of these countries, again, not all of them are dictatorships of the proletariat specifically, but the logic is one that's completely breaking from the usurious finance capital dominated logic that you have in the West. What are they producing for? You know, even the loans, the way that credit is used, it's all for the sake of development. It's all for the sake of actual tangible development of the real economy, which produces social good. So the logic of producing for the sake of exchange value for just capital accumulation, what it led us to is what we have in the West. You know, why invest in productive industries if you can make the same profits, if you can accumulate the same amount of capital or much more without any risk of investment in productive capital? Why partake in that if you could just get money from rents and interest rates and stock buybacks? Why do any development of the economy? When these people say, no, what we want to do is develop the economy, we want to break from that logic where capital accumulation is raised to the level of this God that we have to worship. And no, we're going to emphasize real economic development. Once you have that switch, you're operating with a new logic. Capital no longer has supremacy. Even if you have industrial capital as the engine of development, capital doesn't have supremacy because the culmination point of that logic of capital as supremacy is what we have in the West. And that's what these countries are breaking from. What they're operating with is a more social, communitarian logic where production is carried out fundamentally, even if some of them don't recognize it, for the sake of social good. It's a communitarian, social mode of production that is the one that is coming to dominate this new multipolar world order. From what we're seeing, you know, there might be some changes in the future, but from what we can tell, it's a explicitly communitarian multipolar world order, breaking from the legacy and dominance that capital has had over the world for the last hundreds of years. And this is something that is not irrelevant or indifferent to the class struggle. This is the class struggle in real time. This is the form the class struggle has taken in our period of a global nodal point towards a new world order. So it's not something us Marxists should be indifferent to. It's not something that we should say, yes, but I condemn Iran because of these struggles. Yes, there's struggles going on in all of these countries. None of these are pure entities. There's struggles going on in China, which is a dictatorship of the proletariat. Of course, there's going to be secondary, tertiary contradictions within these countries. But the principal one is the one that we see right now in a globe, a planet that is switching towards a new form of logic of operating international relations and national relations. And this is very intimately related to the class struggle and the form it's taking today. And communists have to side explicitly on the side of multipolarity. Communism is the real movement of history that abolishes the present state of things. And multipolarity right now is that movement which is abolishing the present state of things. It's where communists have to be.
I want to say one thing loudly and clearly. All of this is the rational planning of economic activity. All of it. In 2024, there is no longer such a thing as an anarchy of production in a real economy. All economies are planned. The global economy is planned. It's worked out in very intricate trade deals. It's worked out even on an inputs level. It's worked out on a markets level. It's rationally planned. And this is precisely what Marx says is the first step of a socialist society: to remove capital controlling people and put people in control of capital. And what is pushing this? Not ideas, but necessity, just as it did in the early Soviet Union, just as it did in early Cuba, in early China, all of it. Russia is not moving towards communism again because it wants to, or because Putin's a cool guy, right? Or because he's secretly a tanky. It's moving that way because it must. This is the global alignment of forces and how the system is creating its own gravediggers. When ultra lefts talk about inter-imperialist rivalry, they fundamentally cannot understand what capital is, what the book Capital was about. It's about the development of bourgeois society, and the unfolding of social relations. They cannot understand what class struggle is. They see everything through this weird empiricist dogmatic lens that just bothers the ever-loving hell out of me. Because go ahead.
Carlos was saying too that so far the multipolar world is taking a communitarian form. And Noah's saying that it's a move towards planning people over capital. So this is inevitable. And that's exactly what I wanted to say, that it has to take this communitarian form because the U.S. produces based on what produces the most surplus value, right? It's all based on exchange value, trying to get the money value as high as possible, to get their profits as high as possible. And what that does is it deprioritizes the production of use values, the production of what's actually good for the society, what's actually good for the people. So in order to move away from the US dominated system, these countries are forced to move towards a more communitarian system of planning, which prioritizes use values above exchange values. So they're sort of forced to go in this more communitarian direction in order to split from the US. And that is also what's causing the US to decay. That is also what's resulting in deindustrialization and all of our people being debt trapped, rather than working, productive jobs, good paying jobs that allow them to support their families and also, produce things that help society grow, like produce things that could be involved in infrastructure projects, produce real tangible things. There's far less of that, and it's causing the U.S. to decay, which is something Lenin talks about in his chapter in Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, called the decay of imperialism, to where imperialism becomes bad for the home country at a certain point. And that's the point we've reached. So in order to split from the U.S. and in order to not decay themselves and in order to build themselves up into these economic superpowers that can challenge the U.S., like what China and Iran have done, they're forced to move towards a more communitarian type of central economic planning. And I think that's only going to continue. This is why Russia's going to have to, as Alan Freeman says, they're going to have to come to terms with their socialist past, because they're going to have to realize that they're moving towards socialism and communism basically on their own without calling it that. And, even Putin talks about this. Putin, I would consider a Russian nationalist, but, he said there's nothing wrong with socialist or communist economic ideas. They're good. He consults with the KPRF on a lot of things. There's videos of them, having public discussions about economics, and Putin's not far off from what a socialist government would be doing in terms of the economy. So, sorry, I just want to make that point that it's kind of inevitable and that they're being forced to do this. And this all goes back, like Noah said, to reading Capital. Communists in the U.S. got to read Capital, got to understand it. It's will change the way that you look and think about things for the better.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think that one of the things we have to remember, like whether it's James Connolly or Fidel Castro, it was their thirst for sovereignty, their deep nationalism, their love of their people, and their thirst for some real sense of autonomy for their nations, real sovereignty, that led them to realize that it's only acquired through socialism. And in the Cuban context, through Marxism-Leninism, through a communist party at the helm of the development of the nation. And what we're seeing with the global majority is the same thing. After years of debt trapping, decades of debt trapping, unable to pay that debt back, they're breaking from the global imperialist system. They're yearning for real sovereignty. And they have to realize that that project of real sovereignty cannot be solved on an individual basis. It's even difficult to solve it on a regional basis, but a regional basis would be superior than just individual countries. It's something that the global majority itself is coming to realize, that if we want real sovereignty, which again, the logical conclusion of real sovereignty is we can't have foreign capitals controlling our nation's resources, labor, etc. And if you're a real nationalist, you have to take it to the extreme, which is it's really the people that have to control all of this, which would be socialism. But they're coming to realize that if they want real sovereignty, they have to band together. And this new multipolar world, that's what it represents for a lot of these nations. The potential to have sovereignty, to have the future of their country's politics, ideology, economy, everything, culture in their hands, to not have it be imposed from outside by global financial institutions like the IMF and World Bank, which are just US controlled entities for imperialist dominance in the neo-imperialist world order, which is collapsing. So that question of sovereignty is so central. And this is why the angle that we have developed in conjunction with, of course, Infrared and Haas, of thinking about America as an occupied nation is important, because what we too yearn for is sovereignty, the ability to determine our own future, which has been something that we haven't really been able to determine under the dictatorship of capital that we exist under, but it's something that we need. And that sovereignty, of course, we know it has a name. Its name is real socialism, it's communism, but it's fundamentally, it's a common project that we have with this whole rising multipolar world. It's taking different forms, but I think its logical conclusion, especially for us in the belly of the beast, is communism. Communism is the only thing that can give us real sovereignty, real control and autonomy over our lives, our politics, our economics, our culture, our education, everything that the American people are complaining about. Only communism is the antidote to all that. Only communism can integrate us as a real pole in this pluripolar or multipolar world order.
Precisely. The question is not, will we have a planned economy? It is, who is doing the planning and in whose interests? Sovereignty comes when we take that and plan it in our own interest, in the people's interest, because right now, the forces holding our country that we all love in bondage are global, interested only in their own enrichment, interested only in this unlimited accumulation with nothing underneath. I mean, it's based on this sort of a full abstraction of financialization with no real economy, no real productive industry creating anything, creating any actual value. And so what happens? You see all of these sort of social ills of alienation. You see suicides go to record rates you've never seen before. You see organizations promoting prostitution. You see all of these pornography addiction. What's the main thing on the internet right now? It's pornography. That is a sign of a people without their own sovereignty, with all of these distractions that fulfill that hole that all of us have without it. And that's why we fight. I don't know, at least for me, it's so that my son doesn't have to live this life that I've had to, where I spend the majority of my life, the majority of the hours I am awake, making someone else rich, where he can work for himself, because the American people are a sovereign people at that point, where we have control over our own destiny and not these financial institutions that we sort of relate to as, blank suits, just parasites on our backs.
Absolutely. I think we can move to our next segment on D-Day then. Carlos had a source that he wanted to show us and talk about, I believe.
Well, it's just a general discussion. Of course, the
Okay.
D-Day celebrations in Europe excluded the country that did most of the fighting and dying and killing of Nazis, the country that saved Europe from Nazis. Let's remember the famous quote from Marshal Zhukov, I believe. Europe saved us, Russia saved Europe from Nazism. They'll never forgive us for it. And here they are in the celebration of D-Day, not inviting Russia, again, the country that lost 30 million of its people fighting to defeat Nazis, but inviting the Ukrainian state that traces its historical lineage to the band-direct forces that worked in conjunction with the Nazis, that even took certain activities to such an extreme that the Nazis themselves were like, yo, cool it. You're taking this a little bit too far. So a celebration of D-Day and you invite a fascist state, a Nazi state, a state that traces its legacy to the Nazis, but you don't invite Russia? You don't invite Russia? Seriously? And what do you do right after? Well, let's see what the US does literally right after. There was a historic ban on the sending of US weapons to Ukraine's Azov battalion, of course, a Nazi battalion with Nazi insignia all over the place. This ban was lifted. This ban was lifted. And how is it being covered by the lapdog media, who are the bitches of the elites? How is it being covered? Well, they're basically saying that because it changed its name from Azov Battalion to Azov Brigade, that it's not the same one that did, crimes in 2014. It's not the same entity that they covered themselves in the Western mainstream media, showing the basically Hitler youth camps that they pass children. We've covered it on the channel. Now they're trying to say that Nazi entity, the Azov Battalion, it's not the same one as the Azov Brigade. The Azov Brigade is a good nationalist battalion, and therefore we're lifting the ban. Well, if they were covered under the ban, doesn't that already imply that there's an intimate connection with the Azov Battalion? If it's the same people, if it's the same logos, if it's the same everything except that from battalion to brigade, which makes sense changing the name when it's incorporated into the official armed forces of Ukraine, so that's what they're saying now. It's no longer a Nazi battalion. It's the Azov Brigade now, not a battalion. And therefore, it's perfectly fine for the U.S. to send weapons to literal neo-Nazis. Now, as realists, we know that the neo-Nazis have been using these weapons all along. But in international relations and geopolitics, these almost like symbolic openings, they matter. Because now it's explicitly the U.S. saying, yeah, Russia can't come celebrate the victory of the Nazis that they did 90% of the fighting for. But right after, we're going to send weapons and resources to literal Nazis that we recognize as Nazis. And now we're just saying, we don't care. Let's send them anyways to fight and kill Russians after the U.S. had already given the thumbs up to using U.S. weapons on Russian soil. So Ukraine can use American weapons on Russian soil. This is the setup for World War III. It's completely ludicrous. It has nothing at all, not even a semblance of interest, of the interest of the American people in mind. It is not in our interest to pursue any of these things. It has nothing to do with the interest of the American people. This is the imperialist interest of a ruling class that is crumbling, seeing the birth of a new world order and can't accept it, and is going to go down swinging and bring all of us down if it has to. That's what this is, and it's extremely scary. And it's not talked about in any of the medias, and when it's talked about through lies and manipulations and distortions and topsy-turvy turning of world events on its head. It's completely disgusting, and it's leading us towards a very likely nuclear third world war.
What's interesting to think about is what was the goal of Nazi Germany? It was to control all of Europe, to take over all of Europe and basically make it a colony to Germany and, move on to world domination, colonize the entire world. And they failed in that, and they were defeated first and foremost by the Soviets, but also by the Western powers. But since then, what has NATO done? What has NATO done? They've got full control of Europe. Europe's going against their own economic interests to help the U.S. fight this proxy war with Russia. They've colonized the global south and stolen their wealth. The only places they haven't colonized are the so-called axis of resistance. You know, these countries like who make up the multipolar world. You know, China and their allies. But really, NATO has carried on the project of Nazism and carried it to more of its completion than the Nazis ever did. And, you know, there's a direct connection too with all these NATO officers who were former Nazis, all these Nazis who were brought into NATO and given positions of power within the organization. So as John Jackman said in the recent YouTube short that he uploaded on our channel, or that we uploaded here on the Midwestern Marx YouTube, if somebody from 1930s or 1940s Germany saw the D-Day celebrations in the US, they would think the Nazis had won. And, you know, in many ways they have. I mean, they haven't completely won because of, you know, heroic countries like China who are fighting against US unipolar domination. But for a long time, the fascists at NATO dominated the entire world without much resistance, especially after the collapse of the USSR.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I don't think people really apply this to how they look at the world. Like Carlos was just saying, we should all be terrified at what the ruling class is currently doing. And it's not just some new thing. It's an unbroken chain of organizing, funding, and keeping Nazis propped up, not just as NATO officers. They propped up banderist scum all over Ukraine, all throughout World War II, and then following World War II, and stay behind units like the Galen Group. Brought some over here, along with German Nazis, rehabilitated them, put them to work in our State Department, in state-funded institutions like NASA, and all throughout our deep state. Nazis are here, right? The old enemy is the new enemy. And what does it take to beat Nazis? What did Eddie say right at the beginning? It always comes down to one thing: the communists against the Nazis. And if you're not on the side of the communists, you are by default on the side of the ruling class, which is the Nazis. It's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying.
And in that clip that Eddie mentioned from John Jackman, I followed up because I really like the analogy. And what's interesting is that Germany has this, because it was two Germanies, the East German side saw itself as the people that fought the Nazis. So there was no reckoning needed to be done about the Nazi past, because, you know, their past was the past of the people that fought against Nazis. West Germany, though, had this crisis of identity for decades. How do we deal with our Nazi past? How do we, you know, embrace reparations, or how do we overcome this guilt? And eventually it ends up developing this culture of remembrance, where they end up basically accepting the guilt, you know, the guilt as a central part of their national identity. And it ends up being elevated to what scholars have called a guilt pride. They have a deep pride, a sense of superiority on the basis of that guilt, which is a very similar, you know, if you think about early 1940s Germany, we're superior because we're Aryan. Now we're superior because we have the capacity to have this guilt, this reckoning that no other country has. So it's still a form of supremacism. But either way, their whole national identity has been based on embracing the guilt for the legacies of Nazism. But what state are they supporting today? What state do they make? And this is, I think, unprecedented in the history of humanity. What state do they make their citizens also pledge loyalty to? Israel. Germany, to become a German citizen, you also have to pledge loyalty to Israel. The flags of Israel are all over its governmental buildings. It's supporting the state that is doing today what the Nazis did in the 30s and 40s, supporting a Nazi state, a state carrying out an ethnic cleansing that has intensified into, you know, an explicit genocide right before our very eyes, being chronicled in those little devices in our pockets, So what has it learned? Its whole basis of national identity is like, we have learned from our past. We have embraced our guilt. No, you haven't. Like John's example, if Germany were, if the Nazis were to spawn in 2024 Germany, they're doing the same thing. They're supporting a genocidal ethnic cleansing entity. Except this time, it's the paradox is that it's one that legitimizes its genocide on the basis of the genocide of Jewish people. And it tries to equate the horrendous imperialist, racist, supremacist ideology of Zionism with the Jewish people. And it's the most anti-Semitic thing one could do. So it's supporting a state that is anti-Semitic in that form, that is promoting anti-Semitism, because if you put the Star of David on the worst crimes humanity has seen, crimes that are then chronicled on people's phones all over the world for them to see, you're promoting anti-Semitism. So where's the difference? In substance, there's really no difference. It's still the imperialist system operating in the way that it does whenever it's in periods of crisis, where fascism comes to the fore. And the form it took in Germany, it's very similar to the form it's taking in the cleansing of the Palestinians by the Zionist state. So Germany basically won. That's not to say that all the scientists and government officials that were then incorporated into NATO, it wasn't just the US and Canada, they basically kept their post. The Nuremberg trials didn't go anywhere near as deep as they should have gone. And where they went, it was all basically thanks to the Soviet Union. Without the Soviet Union, there probably wouldn't even have been a Nuremberg trial. Because the West knew that if there was a Nuremberg trial, they would be tried themselves for what they've done to the global South. So, this cancer of Nazism is still with us. It doesn't matter if the nation that brought it forth and gave it that form of Nazism, it doesn't matter if how many times, for how many decades they pride themselves in having reckoned with their past. They haven't. They're supporting the same things in real time. And that D-Day celebration, as John mentioned, if the Nazis spawned into that D-Day celebration, they would have thought they won. And they, to a certain extent, did. But the world where you could see their victory is coming to an end.
And, two things. One, Zelensky went to a D-Day celebration there, which is in Normandy, which is absolutely disgusting, right? I can't believe people even put up with that. But it reminds me of what we were talking about earlier, right? With the wokes and the Nick Fuentes people being the same, because that's exactly what it is. And just like the wokes cheered as the Canadian Parliament gave a standing ovation to a Nazi, an actual Waffen SS sergeant, what was that, 4 or 5 months ago? So they do now, right? It's absolutely disgusting. I don't know. Sorry, I got a bit of a headache, so I'm being a little quieter than usual.
Well, Zelensky's Jewish, Noah, so he can't actually associate with Nazis.
My bad, I forgot.
Yep.
Well, folks, this has been a beautiful stream. We promised you last time. We've been covering the CPUSA affairs a lot, but we promised you would talk about general geopolitics. It's such a turbulent time that we're living in. I wanted to let you all know that we're cranking out books left and right with our publishing press. We have a new one that just came out yesterday, 2 Tactics of Social Democracy in the Democratic Revolution, a text from Lenin that is extremely influential and timely for our class struggle right now in the U.S. And it also has an introduction, a commentary, a contextualization by Dr. Thomas Riggins, of course, very central counseling figure for the Institute, someone who's been a lifelong philosopher for 60 plus years, taught at the most elite university, lifelong communist his whole life, someone who's been harassed and repressed by the deep state because of his communist commitment. So you're going to literally have the opportunity to not only read Lenin's excellent text, but also read the commentary from someone who's a seasoned veteran in the communist struggle. So that's available now. It's almost a 300-page book, so it's $20 the paperback copy. The ebook is $8. Buy whatever version you're able to afford. But of course, these are institute prices. Out of the Academy, the books that come out, which are a fraction of the quality, they'll be priced at $130, $140. We're not doing that to any of our working class viewers. And later this week, you should be able to also purchase your copy of Why We Need American Marxism, my new book explaining why we need American Marxism, amongst other things. And so far, the people who have been able to read it have considered it a valuable contribution. So I hope that the general public is able to see the same value that some of the endorsers have seen in it as well.
Very cool. Excited for people to read that. All right,
Yeah.
Thanks for hanging out today, everybody. Appreciate all the super chats that we got. Poper's gifted a sub. I think we missed that. Thank you so much. Got a whole lot of Midwestern Marx members. I'm off to Oklahoma now. I gotta go catch a flight and do a wrestling tournament. I'm hoping that I'll have time tomorrow to be able to join these guys on the Revolutionary Blackout Network with Nick. Nick at Noon, I believe it's called. Hopefully I'll have time. If not, these two will do a great job, I'm sure. So make sure to tune in for that tomorrow. And yeah, any parting words, boys?
We will be uploading the new and improved, Americanized, Falkanized version of the International, which we'll be signing off to in just a moment. We'll be able to upload it this week, so you can bump to it, as the kids say, without having to watch the whole stream and just look for what part of the end you can listen to it. So look out for that and much more. Midwestern Marx signing out.
Stand up, all victims of oppression, for the tyrants fear your might. Don't cling so hard to your possessions, for you have nothing if you have no right. Let racist ignorance be ended, for respect makes the empires fall. Freedom is merely privilege extended, unless enjoyed by one and all. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. Let no one build walls to divide us, walls of hatred nor walls of stone. Come greet the dawn and stand beside us. We'll live together or we'll die alone. In our world poisoned by exploitation, those who have taken, now they must give. And end the vanity of nations, we've but one earth on which to live. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in the song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. And so begins the final drama, in the streets and in the fields. We stand unbowed before their armor, we defy their guns and shields. When we fight, provoked by their aggression, let us be inspired by life and love. For though they offer us concessions, change will not come from above. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in a song. So come, Nike